By April of the 49 BC year, Rome's Senate was split in half. The majority of Rome's conservative senators had gone to Greece with Pompeius Magnus, leaving in Italy a preponderance of senators who fully supported Caesar's actions. From this heavily partisan Senate, Caesar easily won support for marching his forces into Hispania, in order to remove the Pompeian forces stationed there. Leaving Marcus Antonius to act as pro-praetor of Italy, Caesar made his preparations. Following the revelation, in late 50 BC, that the Senate had asked Pompeius Magnus to take up arms and defend Rome against Caesar, Caesar ordered his legate, Gaius Trebonius, to take 3 legions, move into Aedui territory, and await further instructions. Upon receiving the Senate's authorization to secure Hispania, Caesar commanded Gaius Trebonius to march his legions south to Massilia, or modern-day Marseille, where he was to take control of 3 new legions recruited in the area. But as both Caesar and Trebonius arrived, the Massiliotes closed their gates, choosing to side with the Pompeians. Caesar instructed Gaius Trebonius to begin a siege of the town from the land, and ordered his legate, Decimus Junius Brutus, to commence building a fleet with which to blockade Massilia's harbour. With the siege of Massilia firmly underway, Caesar, leaving his newly levied 17th, 18th, and 19th legions under the command of Trebonius, proceeded towards Hispania Cyteria, and the aid of another legate named Gaius Fabius, whom Caesar had sent, along with 3 legions, as an advance guard. Fabius, after taking control of the passes through the Pyrenees, which connected Hispania to Gaul, received a further 3 legions from Caesar, before moving into Hispania, and marching towards the river Segre. Lucius Afranius, Marcus Petreius, and Marcus Terentius Varro were the 3 legates chosen by Pompeius Magnus to govern Hispania, while the Triumvir chose to spend his self-appointed extension of his proconsulship of Hispania outside Rome, where he could conveniently manipulate the Senate. As Gaius Fabius came through the Pyrenees, Lucius Afranius, who commanded 3 legions in the area of the passes, ordered Marcus Petreius, who held 2 legions in Lusitania, to join him, and combine their forces. Marcus Terentius Varro was commanded to remain in his region of Iberia, with the 2 legions that were under his command. Afranius and Petreius camped on the western bank of the river Segre, south of the city of Ilerda. This gave the Pompeian forces access to forage the eastern bank using Ilerda's stone bridge, which traversed the river. Marching north of Ilerda, Gaius Fabius ordered 2 wooden bridges built, approximately 6 kilometers apart, by which his forces crossed, and then set up camp on the western bank. Because the forces of Afranius and Petreius had stripped the lands west of the river of their resources, Gaius Fabius also found it necessary to forage the lands east of the river, by way of his newly constructed bridges. During one such foraging mission, which saw 2 of the Caesarian legions on the east side of the river, one of Fabius's wooden bridges was swept away by the river. When Afranius and Petreius saw the bridge's flotsam and debris float past their camp, they quickly assembled 4 legions to march across Ilerda's stone bridge, and attack Fabius's isolated legions. The commander of these 2 legions, Lucius Manatius Plancus, recognizing his immediate vulnerability, quickly took up a strong defensive position atop a hill. Organizing into a defensive square, he was barely able to endure the cavalry charges of the Pompeians, before 2 more Caesarian legions, having crossed the more distant wooden bridge, arrived to rescue them, putting an end to the excursion. 2 days later, Caesar arrived, crossing over the newly repaired wooden bridge, and taking command of Gaius Fabius's camp. Leaving 6 cohorts to guard the 2 bridges, Caesar moved his camp from north of Ilerda, to approximately 400 paces from the hill on which the Pompeians camped. Afranius and Petreius formed lines, and Caesar also positioned the first 2 rows of lines, but his forces did not accept Afranius's invitation to battle. Behind Caesar's lines, not visible to the Pompeian forces, Caesar's men were busily digging a trench to hide behind after dark. Throughout the night, well armed and without the knowledge of the Pompeians, Caesar's men continued building his new camp. The next day, the walls appeared, and the stunned Pompeians swiftly launched skirmish attacks in an attempt to interrupt the camp's progress. Unfortunately for the Pompeians, Caesar had outsmarted them. By keeping half his force on guard, and the other half at work finalizing the trench, and building ramparts, Caesar's goal of a fully entrenched camp was accomplished, despite Pompeian resistance. Caesar next moved to take a hill which stood between the Pompeians and the city of Ilerda, that Caesar planned to use to interrupt Afranius's and Petreius's supply train, and also to cut off the Pompeians' access to the city's stone bridge. The Pompeians reacted quickly, and claimed the hill first. This impelled Caesar's forces to fight from the disadvantaged position of lower ground. The battle lasted for 5 hours, with both sides sending for reinforcements. Unable to take the hill back from the Pompeians, Caesar withdrew, returning to his camp. Not only had Caesar failed to take the strategic position from the Pompeians, but he had lost approximately 700 men in the effort, which was more than 3 times the number of the Pompeian losses. Hostilities between the two camps ground to a quick halt when the torrential spring rains came. Between the deluge from the sky and the melting snows of the Pyrenees, the Segre River rapidly swelled, washing away both of the Caesarian bridges. Additionally, Caesar's camp, on low ground at the base of the Pompeian hill, was submerged. Although Caesar had a supply train en route from Gaul, it too was forced to stop by the heavy rains. With no resources on the western side of the river to forage, and his only access to the eastern side controlled by the Pompeians, Caesar's camp now faced the immediate threat of starvation. While rationing the camp's food supplies by halves, quarters, and possibly even more severely, Caesar waited for a break in the rains. When that break came, he secretly slipped one full legion out of camp in the middle of the night. This legion marched north for an entire day and then, finding a hill which hid him from view, built another new bridge without the Pompeians' knowledge. As the bridge was completed, Caesar's supply train from Gaul arrived, and was diverted to the new, secret bridge. Under escort of one full legion, the supply train marched into the Caesarian camp, replenishing Caesar's forces. Now, with access to the east side of the river renewed, Caesar sent cavalry across to attack the Pompeian foragers who crossed Ilerda's stone bridge. Soon, unable to withstand Caesar's cavalry attacks and forage across the river, and unable to send support legions without leaving their camp vulnerable to assault by the Caesarians, the Pompeians were the ones suddenly facing starvation. So, as Caesar had done, the Pompeians waited for the cover of darkness, and withdrew from their camp. They crossed Ilerda's stone bridge, leaving troops behind to guard it. From Ilerda, Afranius and Petreius intended to make their way across the mountains, into Iberia, where they could join the 2 legions of Marcus Terentius Varro. Caesar, who was quickly alerted to their movements, sent his cavalry charging for the new bridge he had built a day's march north. Once across the river, his cavalry attacked the Pompeian marching column, dramatically slowing its progress. However, instead of sending his remaining legions to the bridge, which was a full day's march, and would have cost him sight of the Pompeian army, Caesar ordered all of his pack animals brought into the river, to disrupt and weaken the water's current. Behind the protective line of mules and horses, 5 of Caesar's legions waded, shoulder high, across the river and, thanks to the delay tactics of his cavalry, successfully caught up with the Pompeians by mid-afternoon. With both sides camped on the east side of the river, the Pompeians and the Caesarians sought out the location of the pass through the mountains. Having located it, Caesar broke camp, and faked a withdrawal, back towards the river, which confused the Pompeians. Then, Caesar sharply turned his legions, making a bold march for the pass. The Pompeians responded by making for the same pass, and both armies raced to gain control. Caesar's bluff, and change of direction, gave him the advantage, and he reached the pass first. Setting up camp, Caesar cut off the Pompeians' route to Iberia. Once again, encamped in close proximity, the men of each army, sharing the same water source, began talking amongst themselves. They asked after the welfare of their relatives who had been forced to serve in the opposing army. Before long, many soldiers were frequenting the camps of the opposition. Caesarian soldiers were invited into the Pompeian camp to visit relatives, and Pompeian soldiers visited Caesar's camp. Afranius and Petreius, in an attempt to stop any fraternization, immediately executed Caesarian soldiers caught in their camp. When Caesar discovered that he had Pompeian soldiers within his camp, he ordered them well treated and safely returned, which made him look more virtuous than their own commanders to the Pompeian soldiers. Eventually, the Pompeians ventured to withdraw again, and returned to the safety of Ilerda, but were cut off by the legions Caesar had left behind to guard the camp. With Caesar's forces pursuing closely behind, the Pompeians found themselves utterly surrounded by Caesar. Afranius and Petreius offered their official surrender. Caesar accepted their surrender, and pardoned both Afranius and Petreius on the condition that they not march to join any other Pompeian forces, and take up arms against him again. Afranius and Petreius agreed to Caesar's proposition, and were granted their freedom. Caesar then marched to Marcus Terentius Varro, who immediately surrendered to Caesar, without a fight. With Hispania now subdued, Caesar gave command of the region to one of his legates, Quintus Cassius Longinus. Leaving 4 legions of mixed Caesarian and Pompeian troops with Quintus Cassius, Caesar turned his attention once more to the still ongoing siege of Massilia.